Edmund Kemper did not stumble into violence. He studied it, he rehearsed it, and long before he ever took a life, he understood exactly what he was capable of. Unlike many serial killers who operate through denial or emotional blindness, Kemper possessed something far more unsettling: insight. He could articulate his urges, analyze his fantasies, and explain the psychological forces shaping him, even as those same forces pulled him steadily toward murder. We will now examine the formation of this mind, the slow construction of a psychology where intelligence sharpened violence rather than restraining it, because Edmund Kemper forces us to confront a disturbing reality. Awareness does not equal control. Edmund Emil Kemper III was born in December 1948 in Burbank, California. From the outside, his early life appeared ordinary, even stable. His father worked as an electrical engineer for testing equipment used by the military. His mother, Clarnell Strandberg, was ambitious, outspoken, and deeply dissatisfied with the direction her life had taken. Behind closed doors, the household was defined by hostility rather than warmth. Kemper's parents argued constantly. Their marriage was not one of reconciliation or compromise, but of mutual contempt. When they finally divorced, Edmund was placed directly into the emotional orbit of his mother, a dynamic that would define his psychological development. Clarnell Strandberg was not passively neglectful. She was actively destructive. She mocked Edmund relentlessly: his weight, his size, his intelligence, and most damaging of all, his masculinity. She told him he was ugly. She told him no woman would ever want him. She compared him unfavorably to his father, a man she despised, framing Edmund as a future failure before he had even reached adolescence. Her language was humiliating, not corrective. It was not designed to guide behavior, but to diminish identity. Her abuse was surgically precise. She would tell him he was a disgusting fat slob, and then, in the same breath, forbid him from leaving the dinner table until he had cleaned his plate. She created a world of impossible contradictions, a maze of psychological traps. When he showed affection, she recoiled, telling him he was suffocating her. When he was distant, she accused him of being sullen and ungrateful. This constant push and pull didn't just create anger, it created a deep-seated hatred and a powerful fantasy life where he could finally be in control. In his mind, he wasn't just hurting women, he was punishing his mother over and over again in a ritual of imagined revenge. Her abuse was not just verbal, it was psychological warfare. She would systematically build him up only to tear him down, creating a relentless cycle of hope and despair. One day she might praise his intelligence, and the next mock him for being socially inept, calling him a weirdo in front of his sisters. This constant emotional whiplash was designed to keep him in a state of perpetual uncertainty, reinforcing her dominance. He was a pawn in her psychodrama, and his only escape was into a fantasy world where he was the one in control. It was in this internal theater that the seeds of his violent ideation were not just planted, but meticulously cultivated. One of the most disturbing elements of Edmund's childhood was his nightly confinement. Fearing that he might harm his sisters, a fear she expressed openly, Clarnell locked him in the basement at night. This was not occasional punishment. It was routine. The basement became a psychological crucible. Alone for hours, sometimes entire nights, Edmund learned that isolation was normal, intimacy was dangerous, and authority was arbitrary. This was not merely neglect, it was enforced emotional exile. Children do not remain empty in isolation. They fill the space. For Edmund Kemper, that space filled with imagination. His internal world became vivid, detailed, and increasingly violent. Fantasies formed around dominance, control, and retaliation. These were not fleeting thoughts. They were structured mental narratives, revisited repeatedly. Importantly, there was no counterbalance. No safe adult intervened. No emotional regulation was taught. Fantasy became rehearsal. As Edmund grew older, the warning signs intensified. He decapitated dolls. He tortured animals. He spoke openly about violent thoughts. These behaviors were noticed by teachers, relatives, and clinicians, but they were consistently minimized or misinterpreted. He was described as odd, intelligent but immature, troubled but manageable. This pattern, recognition without intervention, would repeat throughout his life. At the age of 15, the boundary between imagination and action collapsed completely. In August 1964, Edmund Kemper murdered his grandparents at their home in North Fork, California. The killings were deliberate, not impulsive. He shot his grandmother in the kitchen, then waited calmly for his grandfather to return home, and shot him as well. When questioned afterward, Kemper did not express confusion or panic. He said he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. That statement alone should have ensured permanent confinement. Instead, Edmund Kemper was committed to Atascadero State Hospital, a psychiatric facility for the criminally insane. This decision is one of the most consequential in American criminal psychology. Atascadero was designed to treat, rehabilitate, and eventually release individuals deemed no longer dangerous. But Edmund Kemper did not heal inside its walls. He adapted. Kemper quickly realized something crucial. Intelligence was currency. He listened carefully to clinicians. He learned psychiatric language. He observed how progress was measured: insight, remorse, compliance. He became cooperative, helpful, articulate. Staff trusted him. Some allowed him to assist in administering psychological tests to other patients, an extraordinary level of access for someone who had already committed double homicide. This was not rehabilitation. It was education. He learned to speak their language, peppering his conversations with terms like acting out, maternal rejection, and repressed anger. He didn't just parrot the words, he wove them into a compelling narrative of a troubled boy who had finally come to understand his demons. He framed his murder of his grandparents not as a cold-blooded act of curiosity, but as a psychotic break, a temporary loss of control from which he had now, supposedly, recovered. His greatest coup was convincing the staff to let him administer personality and intelligence tests to other inmates. This wasn't just a sign of trust, it was a catastrophic miscalculation. By seeing the tests from the other side, Kemper learned their structure, their intent, and their weaknesses. He could reverse engineer the correct answers, the ones that signaled stability and remorse. He saw the system not as a barrier, but as a game, and he was learning the rules better than the people who had created them. This knowledge made him virtually undetectable. Kemper learned how authority thinks. He learned how assessments work. He learned how to perform sanity convincingly while remaining internally unchanged. This distinction is critical. Kemper did not fake understanding. He genuinely understood his pathology. What he lacked was restraint. Understanding without restraint is not recovery. It is camouflage. By his early 20s, doctors concluded that Edmund Kemper was rehabilitated. His violent fantasies, he claimed, were under control. He articulated consequences. He expressed remorse in clinically acceptable ways. In 1969, at age 21, Edmund Kemper was released and sent back to live with his mother. Returning to Clarnell was not a reset. It was a psychological regression. The same insults resumed, the same power struggles, the same emotional degradation. But now, Edmund was physically imposing. 6 feet 9 inches, over 250 pounds, and intellectually sharp. Externally, he was an adult. Internally, he was still trapped in the same dynamic. The contradiction became unbearable. Kemper did not explode immediately. Instead, he compartmentalized. He drank heavily. He isolated socially. He fantasized more intensely. He drove the highways near Santa Cruz, repeatedly imagining scenarios long before acting on them. This period is crucial. It demonstrates that serial killing is often preceded not by rage, but by planning, by prolonged internal rehearsal. The idea was forming. When Edmund Kemper finally began killing again in 1972, it was not spontaneous. It was the execution of a long-developed fantasy. He targeted young women hitchhiking near college campuses. His approach was polite, calm, and disarming. He appeared non-threatening despite his size. People assumed someone so visible could not be dangerous. This assumption cost lives. Once inside the car, control shifted. Kemper's violence was not frenzied. It was deliberate. He planned disposal. He revisited locations. He maintained routines. Violence for him was not excitement. It was regulation. It quieted the internal noise. His post-mortem behavior revealed the depth of his pathology. Control did not end with death. It intensified. These acts were ritualized, reinforcing dominance and emotional release. Yet outwardly, Kemper remained functional. He socialized. He drank with police officers. He followed news coverage of his own crimes with interest rather than fear. This was cognition without restraint, intelligence severed from empathy. By early 1973, the psychological tension reached its inevitable conclusion. Edmund Kemper murdered his mother. This act was not impulsive. It was the psychological endpoint of years of domination, humiliation, and internalized rage. What followed was symbolic, an attempt to permanently silence the voice that had shaped his self-concept. Only then did something extraordinary happen. Edmund Kemper turned himself in. He called the police and confessed. Initially, they did not believe him. It took repeated calls for authorities to accept that the calm, articulate man speaking to them was responsible. When asked why he stopped, Kemper gave a chillingly logical answer. The source was gone. Now, we need to examine what happens after awareness meets accountability. Kemper's cooperation with law enforcement, his role in shaping criminal profiling, and the unsettling implications of a man who understands evil with rare clarity, yet was never able to restrain it. Because Edmund Kemper forces us to confront a truth we would rather avoid. Understanding yourself does not mean you can save yourself. The FBI agents who interviewed Kemper, like John Douglas and Robert Ressler, were entering uncharted territory. They weren't just interrogating a suspect, they were conducting a psychological autopsy on a living subject. They asked him about everything: his childhood, his fantasies, his methods of killing, and his feelings, or lack thereof, during the acts. Kemper, in turn, was shockingly candid. He spoke about the murders with the detached air of a mechanic describing an engine. He explained the phases of his process: the trolling, the capture, the murder, and the post-mortem rituals, with a level of detail that was both horrifying and invaluable. He was a perfect case study in the organized killer's mindset. Beyond the walls of Quantico, Kemper's story seeped into popular culture. He became the archetype of the genius serial killer. Characters in novels and films, most notably Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs, drew inspiration from his unique blend of high intelligence and brutal violence. The articulate, self-aware monster became a fixture in the public imagination. Kemper wasn't just a criminal, he was a cultural touchstone, a real-life figure who embodied a new kind of horror. But the fascination with Kemper raises uncomfortable questions. For decades, he has been a model prisoner. He has shown no signs of violence and has even expressed remorse in ways that seem genuine. This leads to a difficult debate. Can a person like Edmund Kemper be rehabilitated? Is true change possible, or is his good behavior simply another masterful performance? The psychiatric community remains divided. If a man who understands his own pathology so perfectly cannot control it, what does that say about the limits of therapy and the potential for redemption? The ambiguity of his remorse is perhaps the final chapter in his long and disturbing story. In interviews, he can be incredibly compelling, speaking with what sounds like genuine regret. He has, on multiple occasions, stated that he believes he should never be released, that the man who committed those crimes can never be trusted. But is this true self-awareness, or is it the ultimate manipulation? Is he protecting society, or is he simply continuing the performance, ensuring that he remains a figure of fascination and study, forever in control of his own narrative? The answer, like the man himself, remains an enigma. His parole hearings have become a recurring ritual. Each time, Kemper acknowledges his crimes and states he is not fit for release. Is this genuine self-awareness, or a final subtle act of control over the system? He refuses to give them the satisfaction of a fight. He remains a paradox, the monster who helped catch other monsters, the killer who reads books for the blind, the man who understands everything about himself except how to be good. Ultimately, the legacy of Edmund Kemper is one of profound disturbance. He shattered the comforting illusion that evil is born of ignorance. He showed us that awareness is not a cure, and that intelligence can be a weapon. The long shadow he casts is a reminder that the darkest corners of the human mind are not always dark because they are hidden, but because we are afraid to look at what's there in the light. And in Kemper's case, the light reveals a chilling, inescapable truth. Some monsters know exactly who they are.